if you still don't have context, Pearmill is a performance marketing agency. We help companies scale on Meta and paid search and paid social really in general, as well as CTV. We've particularly been focused on marketplaces or healthcare companies, and we've done some fintech and DTC as well. Those are sort of the general markets that I would say we do a great job at. I'm going to ask everyone to, if you want to ask questions throughout the conversation, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your page on Zoom. You can ask questions through that. I will answer as many of it as I can as Dino is presenting, but at the end of the conversation, we'll have a Q&A section where I will sort of ask Dino the questions for you and he can answer them. And we try to sort of not have disruption to the flow of him going through the slides and going through the presentation itself. And then the last note, and I'll repeat this at the end as well, is so we actually have like two webinars that are well coupled together. This one is around the media buying portion of the problem. How do you structure ads and how do you try to learn from creative? There is another variation of it where we try to talk about the creative part of this. How do you actually get a creative production going within this process? And so my co-founder Mary is going to be presenting that next month. I'm going to leave this in the link of that webinar in the chat in case you're interested and want to continue learning from our team. And I'll mention it again at the end of the conversation. But without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Dino. Dino, say hello.
Hello. Yeah, I would just like to add a bit more on what Nima said. Creative is still king. Like content is king on Meta, Instagram, basically any platform that you advertise on. So even if you have the best structure set up and everything is in theory as good as it can be on platform, if the creatives are not great, let's say, when I say great, I don't mean they look great. They need to be performance-based creatives. Things just aren't going to work out. So this really does not do me any favor of me saying this, but I would assume that creative is slightly more important than the structure, at least when it comes to Meta and performance advertising on any social platform. So yeah, if you have time and if you want to learn, I highly recommend joining that webinar as well, because very important. So how we'll do this is we prepared some slides for you guys. So I'll share my screen and we'll go through it. As Nima mentioned, we will be leaving some time at the end for Q&A. Before that, we'll also answer some frequently asked questions that people have asked in the past. So yeah, I think it's a good time to get started, no? So we'll be covering how to structure ad creative tests on Meta. Even though this is focusing on testing creatives, you can use the same methodology to test copy, to test CTAs, to test landing pages, basically whatever. But once again, because creative is king, we are kind of making this whole thing revolve around it. So what are we going to talk about today? First of all is the ideal account structure, how to prepare to run these tests. Then the creative testing campaign is where we'll dive in a bit deeper. We'll touch on the frequency of these tests. What's lately been very popular is story specific or Instagram specific real creatives, and then remarketing creatives only. How we analyze the data, and then we'll go over the FAQ and Q&A. So when it comes to the ideal, is this a bit zoomed in? Give me a sec to. Okay,
yes,
this. Okay, this should work out. So the ideal account structure is we are very big fan of simplicity. My theory is that if I look at the account or like a person looks at the account and has an easy time figuring out what's what, then the machine learning model from Meta will also have an easy time figuring things out. And our philosophy is based on helping Meta and I'll just call it algorithm instead of ML model, algorithm learn to make decisions for us. So it's like sending a little kid off at school and just giving it the right directions to figure things out. We've tried to beat the algorithm, we've tried to do manually things, like everything, and the kind of assisting the algorithm do as good as it can always returns the best results. So simplicity based on that is extremely important to us. And during this whole webinar, we are going to assume that the products that we are advertising are basic e-commerce products. So the flow would go, someone clicks on the ad, a link click, and then the conversions are landing page view, add to cart, checkout, and purchase, basically our average e-commerce flow. So what our ideal campaign structure looks like is we have one acquisition campaign where we have one ad set with 5 or 6 ads inside. I prefer to keep things at 5. The reason why I like number 5 is because so we've tested different number of ads per ad set in the main campaigns, well, acquisition campaigns, and 5 is the optimal spend. So if you run 7, 8, 9 or more, what we see is that 1 or 2 creatives in the ad set get the majority of the spend and the rest get pennies. So that's obviously not ideal because ad fatigue is more like ads fatigue much faster that way. And then if we have like 2 or 3, that's also okay, but it also is basically the same issue, just without the other 7 or 8 ads getting any spend. So 5 is nice sweet spot. There still will be 1, 2, or 3 creatives getting like slightly more spend than the others, but we see that around 5 is when the budget split is the best, well, the most equal. Why we like to have one ad set is because we are almost always targeting broad, or like it's our goal to get to broad targeting, just because that has the lowest CPM in general. And after a while, we always end up on broad. Either we started on lookalikes, interests. Broad seems to be the best performing thing for like 2.5 years now. And then when it comes to retargeting, we either have 1, 2, or 3 ad sets, website visitors, add to carts, and similar thing, like up to 5 ads inside. So we created this dummy account on my other tab. This is actually what our ideal structure looks like. So we have the acquisition campaign, which would have 1 ad set, completely broad, no restrictions, 5 ads inside. Going back to the retargeting, this is always like different, but like this is how we kick things off and usually end up merging everything into one ad set, include all of these 3 audiences inside, and all of this still would have like 5 ads inside. I guess I was just lazy to duplicate them here as well, but just imagine all of these have like around 5 ads inside. Then that brings us to the creative testing campaign. So first, there are some rules that we like to follow. Rules is a bit of a heavy word, but like let's just stick with it for now. So rule number 1 is always test in a separate campaign. The reason why I want the campaign to be separate is 1, to avoid fluctuation in the evergreen campaign. So if you were to launch a creative test within the evergreen campaign or the acquisition campaign, once the test is over and we turn the ads off, it's going to introduce volatility in the main campaign. And that's something that we try to avoid because once again, we try to help the algorithm learn as much as possible. The second rule is we duplicate basically the evergreen campaign, the main acquisition campaign, and use the same setup for the creative testing. So it would be same audience, same optimization event, same exclusions. If you have any exclusions, it has to be, so the creatives need to be the only variable between the two. On ad set level, we like to use one ad per ad set type of situation. That way we can influence the budget. You can either use ABO or CBO. I slightly prefer CBO a bit more because I can equally spend, well, distribute around 90% of the budget between all variables, and then let Meta decide on the remaining 10% where it wants to spend that. Why I want to give Meta some freedom is to understand how far the algorithm has come in making its decisions. So what this means is that if Meta decides to spend the remaining 10% of the budget that's not allocated anywhere to, let's say, creative number one, and creative number one is the best performer, then we kind of have a signal that Meta can predict like what would do well. If this is the case for the next creative testing rounds, I will allocate equally around 85% of the budget, and I will go down to 80 because even though it's a creative testing round, we still care a lot about performance. The other scenario would be Meta allocates the extra 10% of the budget to creative number one, which is not the best performer. That means that Meta still isn't in the place where you want it to be with its learnings. So the next creative testing rounds, I will tighten up things a bit and distribute between 95 and 98% of the budget. That's the reason why I like CBO. And to do this using CBO, I use basically minimum spending limits on ad sets. If you prefer ABO, that's completely fine. We haven't seen anything that would like make us say one of these two is wrong. It's basically preference. Once again, the ad set setup is copy paste of the evergreen campaign. The acquisition campaign is just one ad inside. So I know that we kind of don't test more than 9 variables at a time. I feel that 9 is still a lot. I recommend to my clients to stay around the number 5 just because of we really don't need to test 9. But a lot of the times clients believe that more is better. So this is kind of our hard stop. We just don't test more than 9, but we always try to keep it at or around 5. And when to launch, so this is not exactly a rule. We just found that a lot of accounts have wobbly performance over the weekends between Friday and Sunday. It's either much better or much worse, but work days are usually more consistent, and then weekends have more volatility, especially if it's a B2B account. So we like to launch our things early in the week. Mondays, Tuesdays is what we like the most, but we don't have concrete data that says that launching on Monday will get us better results or better learnings. Once again, this is just my personal preference. There is one more thing that we add in the creative testing campaign other than the variables, and that would be a benchmark. A benchmark is an ad that we take from the evergreen acquisition campaign for us to compare the testing variables against. If the budget is tight and we can't really afford the benchmark, that's okay. We can compare the variables among themselves, but the benchmark is just a nice thing to have. How do we pick a benchmark? So we technically have 2 options. One would be to pick the best performing creative from the evergreen campaign. And the second thing would be to pick the most average, let's say, performer from the evergreen campaign. The difference between these two comes to data analysis after the test has concluded. If we pick the most average performer from the evergreen campaign, then everything that's performed better in the creative testing campaign is considered a winner. If we pick the best performing creative from the evergreen campaign, then everything that has better or similar performance to the benchmark is considered a winner. Just because this complicates things a bit, I prefer to pick the second or third best creative in the evergreen acquisition campaign as a benchmark. just because it's easier to be like, okay, benchmark is here, everything above is technically a winner for us. There are a couple of more things that we pay attention to. So one is significant score. Significant score is basically the number of conversions we want each of our testing variables to get to. The higher the number of the significant score, the better the learnings, let's say. We aim for significant score of 10. This obviously, once again, depends on the budget. For clients that are, let's say, selling a product with a 1K average CPA, 10 is kind of unattainable. So we are okay to go down to 5. But then for clients whose goal is, let's say, collecting emails, significant score would be 50 or 100. This varies from account to account, but 10 is some sort of a nice middle ground for these things. The second, well, I'm not sure if it's a second, but like, the next thing that we pay attention to is the testing duration. So every test that we run has to run at least for 7 days. When it comes to creative testing, it is usually 7 days, and that's consecutively. So the test needs to run every day of the week. This will take into account good days, bad days the account may have, and basically spend on every day of the week. For some clients where we run creative tests less frequently, we would expand creative testing to 2 weeks. But most of the time, the results that we get after 7 days tend to be very similar to the results we get after 2 weeks. If you have the budget, if you're not in a hurry with fatigue tests in the evergreen campaigns, run the test longer, you'll get more significance. If you don't, 7 days is just right. And then there is the budget. So you can approach the budgets in different ways. If you have a set budget, then your variable would be how many creatives you can test. If you don't basically have a budget limitations, you can just go crazy. Either go crazy with a significant score, go crazy with how often you test things. You're gonna have more fun, basically. Just to be on the safe side of things, when running tests, this includes creative testing rounds. We don't want to spend more than a quarter of the overall account budget on testing, just because we cannot predict, let's say, with a lot of accuracy how well the test is going to do. So if an account is in a wobbly place, if it's not very stable or very well performant, if we go all in on the creative tests, things could be even worse or even better. But we find that around 25% is a pretty solid budget allocation to the creative testing, so that it doesn't very much shake things up on the performance of the whole account. How do we calculate the maximum number of variables that we can test? So there are a couple of things that we need to figure out before we run this formula or whatever. So we need to know what our testing budget is, what the CPA is, CPA being the average cost per conversion in the main acquisition campaign. And significance number would be how many conversions we want each variable to get to. So let's say that for an example, our budget is 10K. We want a significant score of 10, and the average CPA in the evergreen campaign is 75. X, which in this case would be a number of variables we can test, would be calculated by dividing 10K with 10 and then 75, which would equal to 13. If we want to, we can test up to 13 creatives with a significant score of 10 with our 10K budget. 13 is a bit too much to run for one creative testing round. So if you still want to use the whole budget, I would recommend increasing the number of the significant score, and decreasing the number of variables. Go like down to 7, 8 and aim for 12, 13 significant score. If you don't have a set budget, but you know that you want a certain amount of creative tested and you know what significant score you want, you can just flip the formula and figure out how much that's gonna cost you. Let me just show you really quickly. So the way the creative testing campaign looks, it's just duplicated the acquisition campaign. 1, 2, 3, 4 variables being tested and one benchmark. I think I said this campaign, yeah, a wonderful 10 US per day. And the thing that is gonna limit the budget or like distribute it equally, it's 1.9 US a day for each of these. So that would mean that 95% of the budget is going to be equally spent, and Meta is gonna have a lovely 50 cents a day to distribute wherever it wants. All of these are one ad per asset structure, and yeah, that's how simple it would be to set up the creative testing campaign. So after we set the creative testing campaign up and 7 days have passed, full 7 days, you can either set an end date to your ad set. You can manually post things if you like to spend time in the accounts. It doesn't really matter. But make sure you wait at least 72 hours after pausing stuff for all the conversions to be properly processed. So I think that lately I've been trying to give it a bit more time than 72 hours because there have either been misattributions happening and then Meta correcting, or just conversions being late. But yeah, just give it some time for all the conversions to be properly baked before you analyze the data. And yeah, the second point is how do you look at the data? If you pick the benchmark, that's the best performer. Everything that has similar or better performance in the creative testing campaign is considered a winner. Everything that's, if you picked average performer, everything above the benchmark is the winner. After that, we can kind of rank your creatives. Our main ranking metric would be CPA, in this case, cost per purchase. What we found with some accounts is that certain accounts have a very high CPM, certain creative types. So we've seen a very big volatility between videos and images in the creative testing campaign when it comes to CPM, but then it kind of equalizes in the evergreen campaigns after they spend continuously for a longer period of time, which led us to introduce this custom metric, which would be IPP, impressions per purchase. Basically, we just divide the number of purchases each variable has over the number of impressions each of these variable has with the number of purchases, and that gives us a number. Usually the lower the number means the lower the CPA, but if somehow somewhere CPMs are very high, it's going to have a relatively high CPA, but a relatively low IPP. We like to promote the low IPP creatives in the main campaigns as well, just because CPM tends to equalize between the creatives down the road. This is also coming with a caveat that we will look at the up funnel metrics if we decide to make a promotion based on IPP. So we would look at up funnel metrics like cost per add to cart, cost per initial checkout, just to kind of get proof that the creative with high CPM and low IPP wasn't just randomly converting 10 times, because that also can happen. So after we have analyzed the data, we just promote stuff to the main campaigns. You can either use existing ad ID to promote things in order to keep your engagement on the creatives from the creative testing round. We can also just duplicate the ad. We've tried both methods. There isn't any difference between the two. After a while, they just equalize, a while being like 2 or 3 weeks in the main campaigns. When promoting, we kind of like to, if we promote, let's say, 2 winners from the creative testing round, we try to kill at least 1, preferably 2 creatives in the evergreen campaigns, so that we can still have a nice and manageable number of creatives in the evergreen ad sets. sometimes you cannot really kill the same number of ads that you would like to promote. So it's okay to just like go above that sweet spot of 5 ads per ad set to 6 or 7, but just be mindful of the higher number of ads in your evergreen ad set for the next creative testing round. Yeah, that would be the analysis and the promotion stuff. So I will also briefly touch on the FAQs, the 5 most common questions that we get, and then we'll have a lot of time for the Q&A session. So the first question is, how frequently should we run tests? As almost all of these questions, this depends on the account. The things that this depends on are how seasoned is the account, how fast do ads fatigue, but there is some sweet spot and some kind of guidelines we like to follow. For new accounts that we have just taken over, even if they have a history of, I'll call it just now, like proper creative testing, we will still try to squeeze in 2 creative tests per month. For accounts that we have had for a while, we decreased that to around once a month, maybe 3 tests in 2 months. So like 1 test every 3 weeks. The second thing this depends on is how fast the ads fatigue. Some accounts, ads really don't fatigue with months, so we don't really need to test out of necessity. We just test out of improving performance. Other accounts, we've seen where ads fatigue after 10 days. So for those, we just test on every 2 weeks. This is something you'll have to figure out based on account to account. Yeah, and just decide on the frequency based on that. How to figure out how fast ads fatigue? Just do a breakdown by day, compare the spends and then the CPA for like, let's say the last 2 months, and just note after how many days or weeks the CPA starts creeping up. That's not the most scientific way, but that's the easiest way to calculate ad fatigue. The second question we get a lot is, how do you test story or reel specific creatives, or should you? On some accounts, reels do incredibly well. On others, they really suck. If your account is one where the reels do great, it's completely okay to run reel specific creatives. Only on ad set level, when you're setting up the ad sets, you would select the placements of stories and reels only, and you're good. Run the test like you would normally. Then retargeting specific creatives. This is something that isn't being tested as much as I would like to. The value prop retargeting should be different than what acquisition offers, but data has shown that people don't really care that much if the retargeting value is different than the cold targeting value prop. There is some improvement in having targeting specific creatives, but it's not significant enough for us to justify pushing retargeting specific creative testing rounds to clients who are, let's say, still struggling. Once the clients are in a very good position and they are not trying to keep their head above water, this is something that we like to do. That's part of the incremental upgrades the accounts can have, but we don't consider this to be a very essential thing when the client is trying to find the ground beneath them. But yeah, still recommend it if you can afford it and if you can squeeze it. Dynamic creative ad sets. The issue I have with this is when it comes to testing, we cannot influence the spend being equal between all ad sets, between all variables. So what happens is Meta just picks 1 or 2 and spends on those creatives. The second issue I have with this is that the dynamic breakdown by creative element doesn't always work. So sometimes Meta will not even show us the data. And this is nice if you are a one-man show running the whole company, running the advertising, running everything. So this could be a solution for you if you cannot really focus that much on optimizing meta performance. But if you're an agency, like just don't. It makes no sense to live on the set and forget type of account management. And then the final thing is turning off testing variables before the test is completed or before the 7 days have passed. I am very much against this just because meta takes time to process its conversions. If like we are very much struggling for budget and we are trying to save every penny, I could be okay turning off certain ads after like 3-4 days, but I highly recommend not to like running the complete tests and like for all creatives. We've seen certain creatives get like 10 conversions in one day after they've been struggling. So yeah, preemptively killing creatives from a test is not very much recommended. I get that it could be sometimes essential, but if possible, don't. I think those are the most frequently asked questions that we have. Yeah, that's all
let's
from
do a
our
bunch more.
slides. Yeah.
I got a bunch more for you. So the first one is how many audience sets should you have in a creative test? I think you have 3 audiences with 5 ads within each audience sets in your example. Is that your recommendation?
No. So the 3 audiences you saw were the retargeting ad set group. We run acquisition campaigns with only 1 audience. So I'll just touch on Advantage Plus shopping as well. Even if it's a manual acquisition campaign, acquisition being cold targeting, or Advantage Shopping Plus, we tend to have only 1 audience, which is broad. We use the same broad audience to run tests. The 3 audiences you saw were for retargeting. And if you're running the targeting specific creative testing rounds, I would recommend running those tests only for website visitors because that's going to be the biggest audience that you can run the test for. Arguably, people who have already initiated checkout should convert after seeing your ad 2 or 3 times. They could see any ad, they will convert. So if you're running the targeting tests, website visitors, if you're running acquisition creative tests, whatever is the main audience in the acquisition ad sets. Why I said main? Because I understand that certain accounts need to have different targeting audiences when it comes to cold targeting. So whatever is the biggest spender is the one you want to run creative tests for. If you have the budget to run creative tests for, let's say, men and women separately, and that's how you structure your account, do that as well. But if you only have budget for one, whatever is the biggest spender in the cold targeting stuff is the one where you want to, the same audience you want to run tests for.
Gotcha. You're trying to like keep the environment as closest to the evergreen environment as possible, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. The next one is you mentioned that you don't test more than 9 variables at a time. By that, do you mean not more than 9 ads in an ad set or not more than 9 ads across all ad sets at a given period?
So once again, the way we test stuff is using 1 ad per ad set structure. So it would be either 9 ad sets or because they all have 1 ad inside, it would be 9 ads as well. Once again, try to keep that number lower, 5 or 6. 9 can be a bit too much, but yeah, 9 creatives total.
Gotcha. I think so. By variables, you're really talking about the ad itself, the ad unit itself.
Yeah. One more thing I should add when you mentioned variables is when we run creative tests, we also use the same generic copy for each creative. So we really want to be testing only 1 variable from the whole possibility of variables. Same copy, same headline, same call to action, just the creatives being the, the variable that's being tested.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so a couple that are similar. how do you measure significant score, or how do you calculate that? I think maybe this was earlier in it and you showed it, but do you mind walking through it again?
Yeah, so basically significant score is the number of conversions we want each testing variable to have. So let's stay on the assumption that this is an e-commerce account and we are optimizing for purchases. Significant score would be how many purchases we want each of the elements that we are testing to get. So in our case, we recommend at least 10 purchases for each of the creatives you are testing. So 10 conversions would equal 10 significant score. And yeah, more significant score is better. Better being, so there is difference between like learnings and learnings. Learnings with a higher significant score and a longer testing period are much better, and learnings you can much more rely on rather compared to learnings that like you've gotten in 3 days with some very low number of significant score. So that is why significant score is so important.
Yeah, and there's a version of this that Patrick is asking, how would you measure each variable's significant score? But because we isolate the variable to the ad unit itself, basically it's the same thing. It's just a number of conversions we want to see on each ad, and that's the significant score. Great.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, go on from Vishal. I keep hearing the limit of 5 ads per ad set. Do you feel the same with ASC campaigns? I've been using ASC as my evergreen and just moving winning ads over to that ad set.
So yeah, Advantage Shopping Plus is a bit more of a black hole currently because Meta doesn't really share that much about it and how it works when it comes to figuring out which creative to spend on. I do prefer to have my accounts have around 5 creatives inside. But what I've recently noticed is if a certain creative will do incredibly well in the creative testing rounds, and I just move it in the Advantage Shopping Plus campaign, it takes up a lot of the budget. So even though I have just 5 creatives inside, one takes so much of the budget. So sometimes I feel like 5 is a bit too much for ASC as well. For other accounts, I've had like 7, 8, 9, and then the budget split is kind of equal between all ads. So I think the answer there is as long as the budget split is equal and you're not relying on one creative to carry the performance of the account, you should be good. The reason why you don't want one creative to take all of the budget is what happens if that creative gets rejected for whatever reason, it fatigues overnight or it just stops performing. Your whole account enters learning mode again, and you basically have no safety net to fall back on, like things to step up when the main character dies in a way.
Yeah, it's almost it's like because of the lack of fine control, basically you're putting too much at stake. It's the way I would think about these like super automatic campaigns is that they're being built because the average marketer that Meta and Google are going after are not the ones that are spending in the hundreds of thousands and their whole businesses are reliant on them in that way. They're actually like the smaller companies that are spending much less and they don't know or have the time to care deeply about fine-tune control, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point. We've seen some correlation between accounts who spend 6 or 7 digits a month. ASC works for them until a certain point. Once we go beyond a certain spend level, manual acquisition campaigns tend to be better. I guess for slightly lower budgets, it's fine, but you make a very, very good point. And like I am personally against them. I like to have a bit more control when it comes to spend between creatives. But if ASC is performing so much better than a regular acquisition, I am not gonna stand in its way. Like, let's say, like we still kind of have to be performance first and then figure out what feels comfortable to us later.
Yeah, makes sense. Next one is, can you leave your creative campaign dormant between creative tests? From our own very
Dormant.
own looking.
So what do you mean by dormant? Like
So not spending. Like, do you just turn it
yeah,
off? Like,
absolutely. Yeah. So I actually keep them on all the time because I have a filter that like just shows the campaigns that are on, but I turn off the ad sets. So basically the creative testing campaign is active, actually active, like 10 days out of the 30 in a month, but the campaign is like on campaign level on. But when the tests aren't happening, all of the ad sets are off, which takes me to one more point. I use the same campaign for recurring creative tests. So creative testing round one goes in the campaign, ads get paused. After like whatever 10 days, we are ready to launch the second creative testing round using the same campaign, just setting up new ad sets for round two. So I reuse the same campaign to retain some of the learnings, but yeah, it absolutely is okay for it to not have any spend.
makes sense. We got another one. So why not use CBO with a single ad in each ad set for also the main campaign instead of an ABO with 5 ads in each ad set, in a single ad set? Is there a difference or basically the same?
The reason, so we do that for certain accounts. When we see that certain accounts struggle to, the evergreen campaigns struggle to kind of divide spend a bit more equally, we will try. So that's basically one more test you can run. Basically have two main campaigns, like two acquisition campaigns, one with all ads in one ad set, and another one with a CBO structure with one ad per ad set, and like let's say 5 ad sets. You just compare which campaign does better. If the one where Facebook decides on the budget completely does better, obviously go with that. If the one where you force Facebook to spend, let's say 10% of the budget on each of the campaigns and on each of the ad sets, and then Facebook spends the other 50 or whatever you decide how it thinks is the best, has the better CPA, go with that. We have accounts where we run the like both types of acquisition structures. We are just talking about the acquisition ads campaign having one ad set and all ads inside, because that's the majority of the accounts that we have. But there definitely are some where we also have a one ad per ad set structure in the acquisition campaign as well.
Cool, that makes sense. Just another test. All right, so another one for Marcus. To clarify, are you suggesting that remarketing specific creatives should not be very different from cold targeting creatives?
No. So you should test different value prompts basically to figure out what will work for retargeting. What I said, or I tried to say, is that we haven't seen retargeting creatives perform that much better in comparison to acquisition creatives being used for retargeting. The CPA difference is very, very low, at least in our tests, to justify running separate tests for retargeting as well. And it's not about testing the creatives and like just paying for the test. We also have to take into account production of retargeting specific creatives. So yeah, test them, test different value props and see if it makes sense for you. If budget is tight, just reuse acquisition creatives in retargeting audiences.
Makes sense. And more on retargeting, is it even worth having a dedicated retargeting campaign, or maybe it's better to leave it to Facebook to do the retargeting through the main campaign and keep it light on exclusives?
Yeah, so I very much prefer to leave it to Facebook and not have exclusions in my broad targeting. But because we are a performance agency and a lot of clients and like obviously us too are very concerned, let's say, with the importance of retargeting. That's why I understand why it's okay to exclude stuff from the main campaign, like exclude website visitors and then have a separate campaign for that. Just because it is easier to measure the importance of retargeting rather than Facebook doing its own thing. This connects to the point of Advantage Shopping Plus will retarget existing purchasers, and you can influence that percentage number. If you don't put a limit, what I've noticed in my campaigns is that Meta will spend around 7 to 8% on existing customers, which is okay. But obviously that influences CPA. When you get that number lower, CPA goes up, but you get only new customers. So then there is the question, do you value new customers more or existing customers at a lower CPA more? If we are looking at CPA only, it would be better to let Meta figure out the retargeting and just have one campaign. When it comes to measuring performance and impact, it would be better to have them in separate campaigns and try to get the CPA, overall CPA, as low as possible.
That makes sense. There's one that I can answer. Are conversions the only measure of significant score? For example, if a certain creative drives a much better CPM, would that be factored in? This is effectively the whole next webinar is going to be on how do you look at the other metrics to make decisions, but I'll also pass it to you, if you have other thoughts on it.
Well, join the next webinar. But the short answer is CPM doesn't pay the bills. Like CPM doesn't sell the product. It's actually the conversion that does. So that's why it's our main decision maker, let's say. You can try to find other correlations between how creatives perform, but at the end of the day, it's actually the creative that led to the conversion with obviously enough significance. So I guess that would depend on your objective as well. If you are promoting a blog, let's say, or if the conversion that you care for is people coming to the site, I guess you can take CPM into consideration. But if it's actual sales, the cost per actual sale is the decision maker here.
Yeah, that's a good one. Next one, do you keep track of the accuracy of the test process? And by that, I mean, are the creatives defined as winners in the test chosen by Meta's algorithm once you launch them in your acquisition campaign?
So there is this thing that we do that we call the test after the test. So what I like to do in my accounts, and I know other colleagues do it differently, is I will go back after 7 or 8 days after I have promoted certain creatives in the main campaign to make sure that they are, one, getting enough spend, two, performing well. This happens sometimes, but not often. Creatives that have performed incredibly well in the creative tests just tank in the evergreen campaigns. This is usually due to the higher budgets that the evergreen campaigns have, and those creatives can't take it. I don't know, like they only can work for small groups of people or like smaller budgets, but that happens very rarely. So the ultimate win, let's say, for a creative is step one, to perform well in the creative testing round, and then step two, to actually perform well in the evergreen campaigns as well, and for a long time. So that's the actual win. What's something that you will learn if you join the next webinar is our creative team doesn't only draw conclusions when it comes to creatives based on creative testing winners. They weigh a lot more the importance and performance of creatives in the evergreen campaigns. So consider creative testing round as a trial, and then the being live in the evergreen campaigns as the actual game night, the time to shine. So if you do well here, but you don't do well here, it's not really that as a creative you're doing that well. So yeah, the ultimate thing would be them performing afterwards as well.
Do you have like a benchmark for the general, I call it in my head generalization. Does it generalize to the evergreen campaigns and is able to get more budget and scale up? Is there a success metric there? Putting you on the spot.
Not really. I feel like if we dig deep enough into all the creative testing rounds we've ran for all of the clients, we may be able to find some correlations that the creative team would have to draw. But when it comes to numbers, it's a lot of randomness. I feel that 7 out of 10 creative testing winners actually do very well in the evergreen campaigns. So I would say like 2 or 3 of them either are mediocre, they're just like live for like 7, 10, 20 days and they just like die off or stop getting spent. But yeah, I wouldn't know how you would be able to predict that in a way that you can create a creative that's not gonna tank after it wins the creative testing round.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think that naturally you're going to lose some, and 70% is still pretty good, actually, right? 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
Now the question is, do you ever go multiple campaigns route for big accounts, or even 6 to 7 figures a month accounts that are running the one campaign? Or are the big ones basically also doing their one campaign, 5 ad set setup?
So we have this account that like spends 7 digits a month in Q3 and Q4. 3 years ago, we had 2 campaigns for them because we saw that performed better last year and, well, technically 2022 and 2023. It was 1 main campaign and one acquisition campaign and 1 retargeting campaign. That's it. We try to add multiple campaigns that I used to call support campaigns in case for whatever reason this one tanks, like these 2 can pick the performance up, but it just didn't work for 2 years in a row, and it's just 1 campaign that's doing all the heavy lifting. Which, when you think about it, makes a lot of sense. And the way Meta's algorithm works is everything communicates. So even if you have 3 ads and each one of them is like on its own, they communicate between each other. Then the ad sets talk to each other. The campaigns talk to each other. So like you want the learnings to be more concentrated, to have like an easier discussion between the people inside. So that's like my theory on why having a very, very simple structure works. And we've proven that it works for very small accounts up to like accounts that spend 7 or 8 digits a month. So yeah. Okay, so one more thing that I should just add. All of the things that I'm talking about are coming from historical learnings and data that we've seen. But every thing that you want to test, just test. I found that first rule of performance advertising, it's whatever you think is true may not be true. Run the test for the certain account, like run any test. Just make sure that you will get learnings in a way so that you don't have to run the test again in 2, 3, 5 months. Whatever is working for us should work for you, but it doesn't have to mean that it will. So run the 3 main campaigns test, see how that does for the whole account. Run 7, run just 1. We've tried running acquisition and retargeting ad sets in the same campaign for a period of time. That worked very well. So whatever it is that makes sense in your head, let's say, just run the test. Like you could figure something new out that's going to be outbreaking, or you could fail in a way that you can learn and then draw conclusions why it didn't work. So yeah, testing is nice.
Always good. All right, so one more is and probably also would be useful for this person to come to the next webinar, but when running a test with 5 different creatives, for example, on the same copy and headline, do you test completely random creatives in there, or you test specific parts of the creative? For example, you use the same 5 call to actions or hooks, but different unique selling propositions?
So yeah, once again, I think this is going to be one of the very focal points of the next webinar. But I think we like to have at least 2 different concepts in our creative testing rounds. And then, so let's say we have 5 creatives. 2 of them are different concepts, like new concepts. 3 of them are variations from previous winners. So maybe you want to test different color, different voice, different whatever it is. But like introduce diversity into your tests, test new things always, and then see what has worked in the past and try to make that better. So just find a healthy balance between the 2.
That makes sense. Exploration versus exploitation. We got one more, which I don't know if you have in your head, but they mentioned that they're using a ton of lead magnets at their company. I think they're B2B companies. Your experience, what types of CPLs are you seeing for a low intent resource? And also, do you see CBO or ABO bringing in cheaper CPLs overall?
After a while, ABO and CBO should equalize. Let's say like after 6 months, its performance should be the same. What's the difference when it comes to cost per lead is whether the leads are happening on platform or on site. On platform using Facebook's or like Meta lead gen form will lead to much cheaper leads, but majority of them are gonna be, excuse my French, but trash, like they're gonna suck. So it's not about getting the cheapest leads, it's about getting the quality leads as cheap as possible. And based on that, it's very hard to answer your question, like what should be a benchmark when it comes to cost per leads, because I don't know what your target is, like how big of the audience that you're targeting is, what's the, like how many fields do you expect people to fill out. But if you feel that your leads are not cheap enough, let's say, try to decrease the number of fields you expect people to fill out. Just maybe ask for their first name, last name, and an email. If you're asking for a phone number, that's going to complicate things. If you're asking for an address, that's going to be almost impossible, which is going to lead to like pricier and pricier leads. So yeah, unfortunately, I cannot answer that, but hope that how to get cheaper leads part helped.
Yeah, I think I would add one note there is that sometimes adding fields or making it harder will increase costs, but increase quality at the same time. And so you want to find the equilibrium in these two things. Last question, we have 1 minute. Have you experimented with increases in budget during specific time periods? For example, weekends not working great for a SaaS company, so keeping a lower budget overall, but increasing budget 2 to 3x during the weekdays.
Yeah. One of our biggest B2B clients from the past, we would just stop Friday at 8 p.m. and then we would resume Monday, 7 a.m. Just like set up the schedule, not to spend. For other B2B clients, we saw that running the same thing didn't actually improve performance. Well, technically it did slightly, but like for the days that it was on, but overall, when we looked at the monthly performance, it's actually worse. So test it out for your certain specific vertical. It could work, it may not. But even if you run the tests, make sure to like test it scientifically. 2 campaigns that like the same campaign, one being turned off on the weekends, the other one like being on for the whole week. And make sure you test it like for at least 2 or 3 weeks, because just turning ads for 1 weekend can be insignificant enough.
That makes sense. Well, Dino, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining and sticking around this whole time. Yeah, if you've a bunch of you have signed up for the next webinar, which is exciting to see. So see all of you in a couple of weeks. But otherwise, thanks so much.
Thank you guys for joining. See ya soon.